California, Ms. Sanchez, to inquire.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Secretary Yellen, for being here to talk about some very important topics. The president's budget would help solve some of the biggest challenges we all agree that we face. For example, we've heard from constituents about their frustrations with the tax filing season, and that's why the president's budget invests in modernizing the IRS and providing the customer service that taxpayers deserve. Most of us also understand that we're facing an existential threat in climate change, and that's why his budget invests in a future that is livable on this planet. And we're all hearing from working families who are worried about, of course, the rising costs of goods. That's why this budget invests in lowering their healthcare premiums and the costs of raising a child. Secretary Yellen, I want to really drill down on this last point because we've heard a lot of revisionist history today about inflation. Some of my colleagues are suggesting that the lifelines that we included in the American Rescue Plan are somehow responsible for inflation. They want to just ignore all of the global disruption that we've lived through over the past couple of years, from the global pandemic to Russia's war in Ukraine. And they want to convince working families that the basic supports that they count on to survive are actually somehow to blame for high prices. They want families to believe that our expansion of the child tax credit and child dependent care credit was somehow a bad thing for them. Never mind that the fact that these supports finally lowered their costs and allowed them to afford basic necessities for their households. Secretary Yellen, I would like if you could help me set the record straight. Can you expand on how small the cost of supports like the child tax credit are compared with the size of the overall economy?
Yes. I mean, with respect to inflation, it is, of course, a huge problem and a primary focus. But many factors have led to higher inflation. That includes multiple COVID variants, supply chain bottlenecks that have affected many countries, COVID-related shutdowns in production, and most recently Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And the child tax credit was a relatively small expenditure. It was spent out over the full year of 2021, and I think it accounts for very little of the inflation we've seen. And of course, it achieved a massive reduction in childhood poverty and financial insecurities. Families used the additional resources in part to feed their children. Perhaps that had a small impact on food prices, but what's really important is that many fewer kids went hungry.
Thank you. I think that's important. I think you said 50% of out of poverty as a result of that. Can you talk about how strengthening those supports would give families some solid footing while we try to deal with the true drivers of inflation?
Yes. Clearly the child tax credit is something that helps a large number of low and middle income families and really lets them afford the things that children need, from a roof over their heads to adequate food on the table and the ability to buy back-to-school supplies. So it's very important, and especially at a time when food and energy expenses have gone up for global reasons. We're seeing that everywhere around the world. The child tax credit would give them a little bit of breathing room to help them deal with these expenses. So it's very important, and we can provide that and certainly pay for it. The president's budget proposes many ways to pay for expenditures that would be helpful to families, and they wouldn't fall, the burden wouldn't fall at all on any individuals making or households making under $400,000 a year.
Thank you. Let me recognize the gentleman